Welcome to today's Hinckley Forum. My name is Logan. The Hinckley Institute of Politics is a nonpartisan institute at the University of Utah. The Hinckley provides an array of transformative experiences for students through internships, forums, and classes. Hinckley Forum seeks to foster public discourse and civil debate on the most current and pressing issues, bringing in local, national, and international thought leaders. Today's forum is titled Utah Looks Ahead, Climate Resilience, and the 2034 Olympics, and is presented as part of the 2025 Earth Month programming. We want to thank the U of U Sustainability Office for their partnership on this event. We are excited to be joined by some great panelists. Cecilia Peterson has worked on sustainability in Park City for nearly a decade. Prior to that, she lived, studied, and worked abroad, mostly in Finland. There, she was CEO of The Natural Step and consulted with companies on sustainable business strategies, and worked for several years on a sustainability in IT at the Nokia headquarters, including procurement, global takeback, and recycling programs and sustainable product development. She is originally from Logan. Jared Shumate is a Utah native who has lived along the Wasatch Mountains his entire life. He spent 6 years as a U.S. ski team athlete and represented Team USA in Nordic combined at the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics, where he achieved a personal best of 6th place. In 2023, he retired from Nordic combined and transitioned into the world of trail ultramarathons. Jacob earned his bachelor's degree in geography with a minor in environmental and sustainability studies from the University of Utah. He currently works as a GIS analyst, mapping vegetation on public lands, and will return to the University of Utah later this year to pursue a Master's of Public Policy degree. Martha Howe is Ski Utah's Content and Sustainability Manager. Prior to stepping into her role at Ski Utah, Martha earned an Environmental Studies degree from Vermont's Green Mountain College, rode her bike from New Hampshire to Washington State, and built a tiny home where she lived for 9 months. Martha hadn't been to Utah before she joined the Ski Utah team in 2021, and now spends most of her non-working hours exploring her new home state on her skis, bike, or in her trail running shoes. Today's conversation has been organized and will be kicked off by Alexis Lee, Director of Sustainability and Resiliency for University of Utah Health. Alexis is a Utah native and a lifelong skier. She enjoys working on sustainability projects that improve the health for people and the natural world. Please help me in welcoming our guests.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for those wonderful introductions. I think I'll get us started here. First things first, we'd love to get to know each of you just a little bit better beyond those bios and understand what your personal ties or connections are to the Olympics or to winter sports, and that could be previous Olympics or the upcoming 2034 games. I'll kick us off. I just have to share that I'm also a Utah native, lived here my whole life, and I lived here during the 2002 Winter Olympics, and my father volunteered. He was the head of the slip crew for the women's downhill event, so I had to rep his gear from the 2002 games, but I'm really excited personally because my daughter will be the same age that I was during the 2002 games, so I'm really looking forward to that. So we'd love to hear from each of you what your personal connections are.
Sure. I was not here in 2002. I was watching the games from a bar in Finland. But I remember just hearing about traffic and how it really worked really smoothly. And then with the upcoming games, my connection is that I was invited through the Trails program that's run through, it's an adaptive sports program that's run through the Craig Nelson Rehabilitation Center. Just through that network, they heard that I was good at sustainability type things and was invited to write the sustainability part for the Olympic bid. So we wrote a lot about what the impact of the games would look like and possible solutions around that.
I grew up in Park City, so I was at the 2002 Olympics. Don't remember it, I wasn't that old. So I've kind of been in the Olympic sphere my whole life. And I think when I was a kid, I set that goal of competing there and then finally did it, which was pretty cool. So I wish I was still in a position to try to compete at the 2034 Olympics, but I think by skiing standards, I'll be a little old by then. But yeah, I'm excited to just get that new boost because it brought so much of a community into Park City and the rest of Utah, And I think just kind of revamping that in 10 years will be pretty sweet to be a part of.
Personally, I don't have like a connection to the former Olympics. I definitely watched on TV when I was back in New Hampshire as a young kiddo. Closest thing I came to that is Killington hosted the Women's Downhill World Cup 4 times. It would have been 5 if COVID hadn't happened. But seeing those venues come together and just the crowds and the hype around the sport and everything like that was, I would imagine, pretty close to what the Olympics felt like, but obviously on the larger scale. And that was a really special part of my job back then. And going forward with the 2034 Olympics, Utah has a big involvement with, planning. Our CEO is on the planning board, and he's very tightly involved with everything that's going into it. And sustainability is a big part of that. So.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing. Well, you all are welcome to chime in on any of these questions, but I'm going to start with you, Celia. So I kind of want you to speak to how can we ensure climate and environmental resilience as we make these historic infrastructure investments and prepare for the games? And how did you consider this in particular as you completed the bid process?
Yeah, one of the big pitches that we had, and just the fact that we pulled off an awesome game in 2002, that was super helpful. The fact that our Legacy Foundation has done an amazing job of keeping up with our venues and the legacy of sport in winter sport in Utah was a huge factor. So the fact that we don't have to build new venues is huge for the bid. So that right there has a huge positive climate impact. And then as far as the games go, what the promise was is that we would, or as organizing committee, the games would reduce or draw more carbon out of the atmosphere than the games are emitting. So we went through a pretty extensive exercise of what the emissions of the games would look like and strategies on how to reduce emissions coming from venues, around transportation, but then especially around the legacy. So what would the Olympic Legacy Foundation really want to focus on to ensure a climate positive games, fully sustainable games? One of the big things that, and I did a lot of stakeholder engagement in that work, and one of the big things that we were hearing about, well, the 2 biggest ones are air quality and the ecological health of the Great Salt Lake ecosystem. So those are it's in the interest of the games, it's part of the promise that the games will be helping to preserve both of those. Then there's a lot written in there around just standards, ISO standards and circular economy principles when it comes to sourcing products and building temporary structures for the game. So we tried to get it to be quite holistic in all aspects of the games.
And I want to follow up on that. Do you know to what extent that part of the bid, made a kind of final decision? Like, what was it part of the scoring criteria in identifying, that Salt Lake is the 2034 site?
Absolutely, it was definitely part of the scoring criteria. The International Olympic Committee has a strong interest and advocacy on climate action. So making the promises that we could help preserve the Great Salt Lake, ensure air quality improvements, ensure emissions reductions from venues, but then also some clever ways to get to climate positive as well.
That's great. Thank you. Well, Martha, my next question is for you. How do you think being an Olympic host city impacts the way that all Utahns see themselves? And do you think it contributes to kind of a sense of belonging for community? How do you see the Olympics bringing everybody together?
Yeah, totally. I mean, if anyone was there for when the bid happened and the announcement happened, like in the middle of the night, I know our PR director was there. It was so electric and everyone was so excited that we're going to bring it back. And like Celia said, we've done it before, and so now we're only just going to do it better. And as a sense of community side of it, it's really unique that we still have these venues and that we actually open them to the public and we give the community a chance to be that much closer to these athletes and to these experiences, and that definitely brings us closer. And also the youth is a big advocate for that as well. There's so many young kids now who are at that Olympic bid announcement, who are watching on TV and everything, and those are the ones who are going to be really excited, and the parents are going to invest in those kids to be those Olympians, and we have so many facilities to support that. And I think that is such a special blend that will make this community involvement super unique and important. So,
Awesome. Jared, my next question, or did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Sure.
No worries, you don't have to. I do have another question for you if you don't.
Got it. I was going to say, like, as an athlete, the Olympics is huge, but I think as spectators and like a whole community, even if you're not competing, the Olympics is huge. Because I'd be shocked if any of you really know what Nordic Combined is, the sport that I spent like 15 years competing in. So we would always compete in Park City. We had national championships every year for like 10 years straight, and the only spectators were parents and siblings. And then as soon as you put the word Olympic team trials on it, we had like 8,000 to 10,000 people show up, just because everybody gets so excited, both as athletes and as spectators.
Yeah, that's great.
I think that this is where Utah has a pretty nice heritage as well. I know Governor Cox was really excited about the spirit of volunteerism that we have in Utah and being able to, for lack of a better word, capitalize on that and engage people in the Olympic spirit and around climate action. I think that there's huge opportunities. People that like sport like to be outside and want to make sure that we've got clean and healthy and comfortable places to continue to sport and play.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I guess my next question for you, Jared, was, as a competitor in the 2022 games, what did you on the athlete side see that spoke to any kind of like local long-term investments or community building? Like, were you privy to any of that? Like, what was your experience?
Yeah, the 2022 Olympics are definitely pretty unique just with COVID. But they essentially started from scratch. There was 3 separate Olympic villages for the Beijing Olympics. One of them reused a lot of the venues from the 2008 Olympics, which was sweet. But as far as I know, the other 2 were built from scratch, which I tried to fact check myself. I saw that they claimed to have spent about $4 billion, but all the estimates were that they spent like over $40 billion building all these venues, because I don't think they existed at all before the Olympics, and now they're like these crazy world-class, top-of-the-line venues. So I guess hopefully those are used in the future. Then at least the village that I was in, they had plans to make it like a community. I don't know if it existed before the Olympics, but the plan was to kind of establish this community with housing and stores and restaurants, ski resort. So they had to start from scratch. Thankfully, Salt Lake, we already have all the infrastructure. Might need a couple $1 million of boost, but not $40 billion of construction.
Well, I'm curious, how did you hear, like, it sounds like you heard kind of like through the grapevine that there were intentions to use those facilities again later. Like, was there any kind of communication about that? Or was it just like, this person heard from this person? Like, how did you hear about it?
That's a great question. It might have been in our like media training that we heard all this.
Okay.
I think the biggest biggest infrastructure investment was the bullet train that we used, which I think was like a $10 billion bullet train. But yeah, that was super cool to go like 240 miles an hour on a train, which I don't know if Salt Lake needs that, but a little boost in just the tracks would be sweet.
Well, and we wouldn't have tracks if it wasn't for the 2002 games. So,
Yeah.
okay, great. Well, my next question is for you, Celia. So how do major events like the Olympics or Sundance impact a town like Park City in absorbing a huge number of visitors for a, kind of comparatively short period of time? Do they actually matter that much for your infrastructure and economy?
Absolutely. We deal with that day to day because of our visitor economy in Park City. We just move a lot of people through, and it creates a lot of waste first and foremost. So we are continue to struggle through recycling and landfill diversion. But one thing that I'm pretty excited about that the games and opportunity might present is starting to convert to more upstream thinking and waste reduction in the form of perhaps reusable systems, or just thinking about ways that we can get rid of single-use items in our lives as tourists, especially. That's a good way to introduce people to new habits when they're open and visiting. So I think Park City could definitely have a huge role in the fact that we put on FIS World Championships, Sundance for one more year. There's a lot of room for improvement, but with the games coming and having the world's eyes on us through the lens of sustainability and climate action. We've got a lot of work to do. There's some redevelopment that will be happening in Park City, not necessarily tied to the Olympics. It's just parts of town that are ready for some redevelopment, but looking at ways that we can make those zero emissions and really starting to talk the talk, or walk the talk, basically. So I'm excited for what Park City is preparing for the Olympics. Another fun thing that we're looking at is ways to get off of natural gas for our heating. That's a big part of our, a big part of our own climate impact. So there's lots of fun things and lots of opportunities that we can use the Olympics, about 9 years now, to start develop our showcase for sustainability.
That's great. And I mean, I think that upstream thinking and the public scrutiny sort of adds a layer of, ambition there. That's great. Martha, I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit more about what sustainability practices you know have been implemented in the ski industry or perhaps across the ski resort areas that we have here in Utah. And in your time, what has Ski Utah done to promote a more resilient sport landscape?
Yeah, for sure. Park City, I think, is quite a good example of being kind of the leaders in making goals and setting this, carbon neutral by 2030. Correct me if I'm wrong, Celia, but that's been really cool to see, and them accomplish that goal and be kind of ahead of the game when it comes to that. A lot of the resorts that I speak to when it comes to what they have implemented and what they're working on, it's a lot of like smaller projects that will overall become a big impact. So things like investing in connecting to more solar, and there's wind turbine resorts out there. Let's see what else we have on there. They're doing a lot of restoration projects too. Alta has been kind of like the original green resort, I would say. They have always been so invested in doing restoration and tree planting and just keeping that in, their top 5, morals when it comes to running a ski resort. As far as community impact, like it's hard for the resorts to, put everything in the forefront. Like they're also trying to run a business here. And so everyone I talk to is they're doing their best. They have it on their radar, but it can be kind of easy to fall back onto like the negative side of things. So I always encourage people to focus on the positives and also volunteer when they can, when there's restoration projects, when there's opportunities to donate money to certain projects and stuff like that. These resorts are trying to do their best in what they can, and with the Olympics coming up, they're probably going to start to do more. So if there's places to volunteer or put some money, that'd be amazing. Yeah.
That's great. Well, and I guess I'm curious, do you see is there like something in particular that you think the future holds for ski areas in Utah in terms of sustainability, or like something that you see everybody reaching for?
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret that the winter seasons are getting shorter, and there's predictions online that can seem pretty scary when it comes to, shorter seasons, or right now we're just seeing a shift in when the snow comes in. It used to be right around December and Christmas, and now it's kind of pushed to January all the way through April. And so that is no surprise and no secret, but we, like I said, would try to focus on the positive, and where there might be less snow currently, the resorts are making adaptations to keep the ski resorts going, make more snow, which also has some impacts, but they're doing what they can to try to keep everyone coming out and skiing. And I always say there's this big group of people already who come and ski. They already care about the outside world, and they want to spend time here, and they're choosing to do that, and they're choosing to spend their money in the mountains. So it's a great audience to talk to that stuff about, and they do care. We just have to create these areas where they can actually take action, and I think it'll happen.
Yeah, pathways for action. I actually think that's a great kind of pivot. Jared, you did some research in your time here at the U, as I understand it, on snowpack and long-term weather trends. Can you comment a little bit about that research, and then also on natural versus man-made snow? And I would just love to hear a little bit more about your research, and then maybe we can talk about snow and your experience as an athlete too.
Yeah. Yes, part of my geography degree, I got a GIS certificate. And to get that, I did a research internship in the snow hydrology lab, which I think is upstairs in this building. Yeah, I think it's upstairs. And so we looked at essentially from 2002 till 2023, which is when I did that certificate. We looked at daily satellite imagery of snow cover at all of the Olympic venues, Olympic outdoor venues. So that was Deer Valley, Park City Mountain, the Olympic Park, Snow Basin, and Soldier Hollow. And the gist of the research was that we're doing pretty fine, but the satellite imagery can't distinguish between man-made and natural snow. So that definitely skewed the results to make it look a lot better than it is. So the higher elevation, like Snow Basin, Park City, Deer Valley, snowpack-wise, for most of the winter, they're doing okay. But Soldier Hollow, which is the host for cross-country, biathlon, and Nordic combined, not good.
And I mean, I truthfully don't know, is there snow-making infrastructure on, like at Soldier Hollow, or is that like a typical part the way that it is in a downhill resort?
Yeah, they've done a lot of investment too, I think in the last few years into just overall infrastructure, but especially snowmaking. But we found, so the Olympics, typically they're held in February and the Paralympics follow that in March. So more or less all of the venues are pretty reliable, January and most of February, and then everything really trails off in March. I think we found 11 of the 23 years that we looked at, Soldier Hollow had less than 25% of the area was covered by snow. And then the average like natural snow depth for Soldier Hollow is less than 3 inches for most of March. So when we're thinking about 2034, it is the Olympics, but it's also the Paralympics.
Yes.
So while the Olympics happen in February, it's a lot more questionable for Paralympics in March. Because based on like temperatures and snow depth in March, it's a lot less reliable.
Yeah.
And snowmaking is only good to a certain temperature.
For those of us who are maybe not Olympic athletes, could you tell us a little bit more about what it's like to compete on natural versus man-made snow, and how, what the performance is like? And I've heard about the conditions being different enough or more likely to cause injuries. Could you speak to what your experience is as an athlete?
Yeah. I think at this point, I'm sure when I was a kid, we used to do events on like fully natural snow. I think at this point, especially at the World Cup level, natural snow is not reliable enough anymore. So I'd say pretty much at least for Nordic combined, every World Cup or any international competition is some sort of mix, either 100% man-made or a mix of natural and man-made. And it definitely feels different, but I think you compete so much on man-made snow that you kind of get used to it. Compared to natural snow, it like falls apart a lot quicker. So if it gets up to 40, 50 degrees, whereas natural snow kind of like melts together, man-made snow just kind of melts apart. And the last race that I did was the 2023 World Championships in Slovenia, which I didn't know was going to be my last race at the time. But I remember crashing, I think 2 or 3 times over the course of a like 20-minute race, just because some of the turns, when the man-made snow starts to break down, it just piles up into these like 2 and 3 feet berms, which I think I'm a pretty good skier, but trying to ski through 3 feet of slush on cross-country skis is not fun or easy.
Yeah.
But I think at this point, every winter athlete's super used to man-made snow, so it's not as big of a deal as it maybe once was.
Gotcha. Okay. Become more of the norm then.
I can speak to that a little bit. Watching the World Cup venue come together at Killington from like October to November, it was always so stressful because the official people, I don't know what the actual name is, but they had to come out and determine if it was worthy of the World Cup, and there's always like a backup plan. But every year it gets like a little closer to the wire because of temperatures and everything like that, and it is just a lot of resources to focus like hundreds of snow guns on this one trail and then injecting it and so much water and making sure it's correct and usable for them. But yeah, it gets pretty nerve-wracking when the weather is not cooperating and you're trying to make this Olympic or World Cup venue for the athletes. So
Yeah. Well, and I think your point about the snow patterns that we're going to see in March also brings up some equity concerns with the Paralympic Games and the conditions those athletes will face too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. Do you want to?
No, I just am thinking about when the World Cup was earlier this year. Yeah, it was this year. And my colleague Megan here, she's an athlete herself, but and does training with aerialists, and it was raining, like right before the World Cup. That's not supposed to happen in Park City in January, but it's dangerous. Like, I mean, I felt the terror coming from Megan, but it's dangerous when the snow conditions are that much less than ideal.
Yeah, and it's hard to be a winter athlete when you're competing, especially for a cross-country race, because it'll be like a 10-foot wide strip of man-made snow just through like a grassy field. It's kind of hard to be like super psyched about being a winter athlete when you're skiing through mud and grass while it's raining and 50 degrees in January.
This feels wrong.
Yeah.
Something's not quite right here.
Yeah.
Well, kind of pivoting to how entities are responding, Celia, I wonder if you could speak to how government or municipal entities like Park City are responding to climate change, not necessarily in the context of the games, but just in general. And like, what policies would you like to see implemented or are being implemented to continue to make these sites, our community, a viable ski destination and potential future Olympic host site beyond the 2034 games?
Sure. Yeah, I think in Park City, at least, like Martha mentioned, that we have a net zero carbon goal, and we're charging head towards that when that entails converting from fossil-based to renewable electricity. There's a Utah Renewable Communities program that is, Park City was one of the founding members of that, and that's moving ahead. So when it comes to electricity production, that's all looking great. But then some other things that we're looking at is codifying better waste and recycling management, and starting to look at ways that we can use code to pull levers around material flows. Another one is what's called a stretch code. In Utah, the state has the authority to set energy code, and local jurisdictions aren't able to set anything more stringent than that. So looking at ways that we can work within the confines of Utah state policy to use the lever of energy code. So we're working on what's called a stretch code for buildings to achieve a higher level of energy efficiency, using zero emissions is the target there. Another big one when it comes to climate resiliency, our two biggest climate threats at this point are drought and wildfire. Around drought, I think it's happening in Salt Lake as well, but running flip your strip programs, trying to get people to convert their lawns out. Irrigation's one of the biggest water users, and if we want to be snowmaking for the Olympics, then we might need to think about where we're taking water from, and irrigating lawns is a good one in my mind. Like, I'd rather have snow than green lawns when we live in a high desert. But so incentivizing landowners to shift towards more like native and drought tolerant species. Another one, our biggest climate risk is wildfire. So the city's doing a lot of defensible space work. I mean, this goes beyond the Olympic Games, but it's getting harder and harder to insure properties in the WUI, and just because of wildfire threat. So looking at ways that we could be more resilient to wildfire.
When you say WUI, what does that mean?
Oh, sorry about that. Wildland Urban Interface. It's really fun to say.
WUI, I agree. WUI. Awesome, thank you for sharing. I wonder, I mean, obviously, you two are not with municipal entities, but I wonder if there are any policies that you've heard of or things that you would like to see implemented to kind of keep our communities viable, just while we're dreaming.
I don't have anything specific, but like I mentioned before, just anything that's like easily attainable for like the general public to contribute to. Like I mentioned, the community's super excited about the Olympics. Huge skiing community out here. People definitely already care. So if we create, and it's kind of one of my goals, is to create these snackable ways for people to make a difference. Because if it's easy and they can understand the impact, then all of us doing something like that together is gonna make a difference. And I'm just searching for any of those opportunities, so.
I guess just from my personal experience of living in Salt Lake, I don't have any specific policies, but I feel like addressing the air quality and drought through water usage, those are two achievable goals that require a lot of work from a lot of every level of person in society, but I think they're attainable and everybody would benefit from improving those.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I dream just a little bit more?
Yeah,
There's
take
one-
us to Unicorn Land. What's on your mind?
Well, just in terms of agriculture and drought, like there's so many exciting climate solutions. My boss, the other half of our sustainability team in Park City, is at an event up in Heber right now looking at a machine that's taking like waste wood, essentially wood that's been ripped out for defensible space, and converting that into carbon and heating industrial area, basically using that waste heat. So this is where things can start to get really exciting, but then a byproduct of that is pure carbon that can be put into soils that supercharges the soil carbon cycle and essentially can draw more carbon out of the atmosphere, and it improves moisture retention. So as we're trying to think about ways that our lands can use less water to be more productive, I think that there's a lot to dream about, and I think Utah's the place to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there are a lot of really exciting kind of opportunities and things that are allowing us to invest in kind of more resilient infrastructure that will keep things going. I want to talk a little bit about kind of the community aspect too, and I wonder from an athlete's perspective, you know, as we're talking about, as we see snow starting to dwindle, or you know, kind of places where there is less reliable snowpack, I'm wondering, especially across the world, as snow becomes more variable, do we see that Olympic athletes might need to converge in like only certain areas in order to train? And then how does that maybe foster community across kind of political boundaries if you have people from all different nations training in one area? I don't know, is that something that's already happening, or what was your experience, you know, in this kind of like friendly competitive environment of, I mean, it's not friendly, but I feel like that
friendly
is,
most of the time.
I feel like that's what sort of, you know, like it's like coming together in peaceful competition is what I feel like the Olympics represent. So.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what the Olympics is and should be viewed as. Nordic combined is kind of a unique sport because we can train fully like normal in the summer. Like we have roller skis that are weird looking rollerblades, and then ski jumps. When the snow melts off, there's plastic matting underneath. So it's kind of a unique situation where we can train just
anywhere.
like normal all summer long. But I do think there is a lot of collaboration with between countries for each of these sports. Because at the end of the day, like you're all passionate about the exact same sport. So if you get to share that with your teammates or teammates from around the world, it's really cool. Like I know the U.S. Nordic combined and ski jumping teams, we've partnered with Norway. And there's a lot of like, especially smaller nations, partnering with larger nations that have the infrastructure and facilities. Because it's, I guess, part of like the Olympic spirit of trying to bring. You don't just want 3 people winning the Olympics every single year, every 4 years. You get tired of watching the same people win. So I do think there is like a collaborative global effort to like bring all athletes in each sport up together.
Yeah, that's great. Well, and I wonder if either you or Martha, if you could speak to, you know, what are we seeing in terms of like, you know, people coming together to like harness that, you know, like love of snow or love of winter sports for like political, you know, power or kind of change making. Is that something that you're seeing with Ski Utah and some of the work that you're doing?
I would say more specifically on the Protect Our Winters side of things. Jared said he's an athlete for them. I'm on the Creative Alliance team. And it's just a really good way to be within a group, and you know that it's like making a difference. You know that your voice is going to be heard, they're going to listen to your ideas, and you're just supporting this, you know, community that is doing their best to make a difference with what leverage that they do have. And yeah, I would say that that's probably like the strongest corner that I'm living in right now. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Kind of to echo that too, outside of like the Olympics and the ski world, I think the outdoor industry as a whole is like a $1.2 trillion economy. And yeah, I think it's around 170 million people in the US that like participate in outdoor activities. So there's a lot of people that care and a lot of people that are involved. So kind of with Protect Our Winters, trying to mobilize everybody
Yeah.
who does care to take action.
And it's a balance I'm finding between keeping these businesses alive and going, because every year Ski Utah has a goal to bring a certain amount of skiers into the state, and I know a lot of people have an issue with that. Of a lot of more people, we need more cars, and you could just continue to add on to that list. But at the same time, like Jared said, it's creating this community of people who do care about the outdoors. And I don't have an answer for what that solution is or what that balance is going to be, but I think there is some positive into bringing more people into the sport and more people into these spaces, because they are amazing and they are so beautiful. And Jared's made it a big part of his life. I've made it a big part of my life. And we want more people to care about it so that we can keep them going. So.
Yeah, well, and I think there's a lot about having a connection to a space that leads to a sense of stewardship.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Definitely.
One thing that I found really inspiring, and just as I was brushing up, looking at the IOC and their climate commitments, but being able to share best practices from former games and taking the best of what did and leaving what didn't work out very well. Like there's a big ambition to address the use of plastics. In Paris, they had glass bottles, and so there was broken glass bottles everywhere. So, we want to get off plastic, obviously, but just being able to learn from others' mistakes and take the best practices to move forward. I also became familiar with just some organizations and just sport organizations that were recruiting youth into climate action, and how you can build programs to engage youth and people involved in sport at different venues into climate action. So you mentioned kind of warm communities doing more.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we're coming up close on our time where we'd like to take some questions from the audience. So I have just one final question for all of you. And I guess that is what are the long-term benefits that you think the Olympics will bring to Utah and to Salt Lake City? And how do we, maybe make those visions or goals for the future a reality? And maybe if you don't have, if you're not a part of an entity, but do you have a personal goal or a vision that you'd like to see come to fruition as we move forward to the 2034 games? I'd love to hear from each of you.
Yeah, I can start. I think everything that is going to be implemented and all the hard work that Celia's doing on making these changes and making new habits for everyone, I think will just blend into the future for Salt Lake and Park City and all these other venues, because we might have had some motivation to do that, but if we have a 9-year timeline to implement these strategies and to make the air quality better because the whole world is watching, that's a great excuse to start to get things into motion. And my goal and my hope is that everything that is going to be implemented to making the games as green as possible will just continue on as we just live in Salt Lake and Park City and beyond. So,
Love that.
Yeah.
I think for me, ensuring sustainable infrastructure that serves the Olympics, and that's why it's built, but then it lasts for however long until it breaks, or until we get another Olympics and revamp it. But I think aside from infrastructure, the whole reason I started my sport of Nordic Combined was a byproduct of the 2002 Winter Olympics. It was an after-school program that used funding from the Olympic Legacy Foundation. So that's why me, and I think there was 3 other people that started in that program that competed at the 2022 Olympics, and we were the first 3 that started in that program that made it all the way. So I think programs like that to build this community of sport for kids now to continue to pursue sports, because even if you don't go to the Olympics, I think having infrastructure and communities that allow kids to pursue sports super important for community growth and personal development.
That's great.
I'm going to agree with these two. I think the legacy that the Olympics has brought and will continue forward is huge. When I was working last year on the bid, it wasn't really on my radar, but it really struck me how lucky we are to have such a thriving winter sport community in here, and just for training and bringing new people, young people like me on board to new sports is pretty unique to Utah. And then just taking that forward when it comes to infrastructure too. I think the Olympic legacy has a lot to say. Just from 2002, tracks and the front runner came because of the Olympics, and I think public transit, more efficient ways of moving people around, active transportation, biking, got beautiful weather here. And that's my big dream, is getting people out of their cars, especially for sport. We don't always have to have the default as the car. But.
Yeah. I also think that the whole world is watching, and every time I talk to someone from Ski Utah who was part of the Olympics, our VP of marketing was one of the torchbearers. She was right in the mix of it. And, you know, the unfortunate side of it was that the opening ceremony was post 9/11. It was like a few months after that. And everyone said, who I've talked to, that said when they were there and they were experiencing the opening ceremony, the way that the world came together in that moment was just unmatched to anything they've ever seen or witnessed. And so I'm just hoping that while the world is watching, we are just this great example of how to bring a community together and how to be as sustainable as possible. And hopefully people just get on board with what we're doing, and hopefully it works as well as we attempt it to. Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely played a big role.
Yeah.
I remember that pretty clearly. Yeah. Well, we have a few minutes left, so I'd love to open you all up to questions from our audience, if that's all right, unless anybody has any kind of thoughts they'd like to share before we do that. No. Okay, great. Any questions? I think we have some microphones coming to you, sir.
Yeah. The work you're doing in Park City is commendable, but Park City is sort of a progressive gulag when it comes down to climate change. It isn't necessarily filtered down the canyon into the State House or on a national level. Does this bother you a bit that the national leaders and your state leaders just have not embraced climate change?
My thought on that is that when it comes to climate change, I think what in Utah, we embrace what's practical and what makes economic sense. And in order for any of this to work, we have to make it work better, cheaper, and last longer than what the norm is. And that's kind of my day-to-day work. So in Park City, we might like to call it climate action, but at the end of the day, it's kind of making sure that our systems are functional into the future, and using innovation to solve many problems at once, basically. But if we don't make it pencil and it's not practical, it'll never work in the first place. So, and that is a conversation that can always be had in Utah, because we're practical.
I was just going to ask, you mentioned that the games are going to attempt to be climate positive and help the Great Salt Lake and air quality. How, concretely are you going about that?
Well, in terms of the concrete plan, that hasn't been put together yet. Like, we've made the promise and put a few things out there, and I'll just kind of when I was dreaming about the bid ambition, that's kind of what I can really speak to. And then also my personal knowledge. But I think another interesting kind of legacy from the games is that the U started monitoring air quality since then. So we've got this amazing data set. And being able to utilize the resources that we already have to ensure that our air quality is going to get to be within kind of the targets, but I don't know if any of those targets have actually been set yet, but making sure that the games is promoting and using its force to make air quality better. And I mentioned zero emissions buildings, and that's a big thing. And then also better transportation, more efficient and carbon-free, emissions-free transportation systems. I think those are two really big ways to impact air quality. When it comes to the Great Salt Lake ecosystem, there's a lot of good work going on around the state, but I think that right now we're kind of in the thick of it when it comes to water and who has rights to water. So that's way over my pay grade and knowledge on how we're going to be able to solve that problem. But I know that there's great work being done at the U here and up at USU around, and at BYU as well. And there's the Great Salt Lake Task Force that's working on these things. But I think right now, being able to, if there's communities that want to conserve, making sure that that water actually makes it all the way down to where it's supposed to go, and rather than snatched up before it gets there. That's a big issue right now. There's a lot to figure out around this stuff still.
Yeah, I can say that certainly here at the U, some of the infrastructure that will be put in place here to potentially support like athlete housing, et cetera, those are conversations that we've been having about, how can we, as we make those investments in infrastructure upgrades, like how can we make sure that they support the kind of sustainability goals for the 2034 games, as well as, kind of meeting our university goals of carbon neutrality by 2040. We got a few, so let's see. Yeah, sure, perfect. You've got no, you're good. You've got a mic. We'll go you, and then we'll go in the back here.
So some of the earlier models for the Salt Lake say that it will be dried up by 2030, and it doesn't seem like the state of Utah is really doing anything of action, or they're kind of ignoring some of the obvious solutions. And I was wondering if this game would have a positive impact on the Utah state kind of confronting the issue, if you think that will successfully do that, or they'll just let it happen.
I mean, like I said, like no time like the present to start to accelerate any plans you have for protecting the lake, for protecting the air quality, anything like that. Yeah, I mean, I'm in contact with people from Grow the Flow, and they're just trying to get their hands in any kind of government situation that protects the lake. Luckily, with that big snow year we had, we did have a positive growth of the lake after the historically low season. Obviously, it didn't fix the problem. If any of you have been out there, though, you can physically see the progress that's going on. But if you wanted to do anything, there's so many volunteer opportunities to get out and educate yourself about the lake and do hands-on work with them. And if, like I said, any money that can go toward those programs is going to help. Every little bit counts.
Yeah, and I think I would say, from what I understand of the Olympic bid process, I think, right, like this was something that the IOC put eyes on, and I think our leaders here in the state of Utah will be certainly under pressure, and I think we've seen that in previous Olympic Games in terms of like air quality issues in Beijing as an example, or water quality in the Paris Games. So I would imagine it will be helpful, but I think Martha has it right that if it's a topic that you're interested in and you want to support the ecosystem of the Great Salt Lake, finding a place where you can lend your voice or lend your time is certainly a great way to continue to advocate for solutions. We had a question. You had a mic. Wait, you lost your mic.
There it is.
Going back to the question of transportation, do you know of any bills or legislative movements moving forward for carbon neutral or even carbon negative transportation methods for athletes or visitors, such as improving tracks, electric vehicles, hydrogen vehicles that would greatly improve on reducing carbon emitting sort of transportation in the valley?
Definitely not calling it carbon neutral or climate neutral. I'm just trying to draw back, if there's any bills that popped up that I can remember, but around transportation, I can't think of any.
I'm not aware of any either, but I would say we've got a few years, so if you wanted to help write one and and work with a legislator, I think that would be a great opportunity.
At the state level, but I can speak for what's going on in Park City. This might help a little bit, but we're on electrifying our transit fleet and offer a free bus service, and are expanding that, and then working with others to expand the reach even more, so that people from Heber can get up to Park City car-free. Our chamber has a sustainable tourism department director that's working to think about ways that we can get tourists up from the airport to Park City and have a completely car-free experience. So there's definitely things going on, not necessarily at the state legislature that I know of. Actually, down in Provo, I'm always really impressed with the development around buses and then active transportation. They've got awesome bike pathways down there, but trying to think about ways to get people moving around outside of their cars is always on my mind. Mm-hmm.
Oh, we have a mic with the mic. You have a mic yourself.
Hit us. So I'm going to preface my question with, I'm from Moab, so I understand the tourism economy and also the outdoorsy types, because obviously it's Moab. I think With an influx of visitors with the Olympics, inevitably they're going to trickle down throughout the rest of the state into Moab, St. George, or wherever it may be. What kind of impacts do you think that will have on the rest of the state, positively, negatively, with sustainability, economically, whatever you may think?
I think economically, I mean, more people in the tourism, more money, more discovery of new places and stuff like that. But like I mentioned before, there is some negative impact on bringing more people here. People like their comforts. They like to drive around. They like to have their own car. They like to have a base camp with that stuff. So, with the opportunity of having this bigger audience looking at Utah and thinking about coming to Utah, if we can get those new practices of transportation into play sooner and communicating that to them, I think that would be a big benefit. And we can do it. We can definitely handle it. We just have to do it right.
That was definitely something that we considered when we were writing the bid, is basically sharing the wealth, and not necessarily in terms of tourism dollars, but climate innovation or just best practices, and making sure that we're sharing those throughout the state, because the games will be focused mostly in northern Utah, but it's a statewide thing that we want to be able to showcase.
That's great. I think we have time for probably 2 more questions. So yeah, maybe one here in the front.
Well, thank you all so much for sharing your insights. I was wondering, and perhaps this might be, outside of the scope of work that you all do, but as far as like the viability of the existing venues, are you aware of any potential alternatives if the venues from the 2002 games become non-viable, or there's like extenuating circumstances, climate related or otherwise, that make it so that those venues can't be used for either Nordic Combine, downhill, any of the outdoor venues in particular?
I think as far as I know, the goal is to reuse all the venues. I guess I can speak most about ski jumping and cross-country skiing. There's definitely some like big investment that needs to go into the ski jumps to make them up to standard, because the rules change every single year, and what was a legal ski jump in 2002 is no longer legal for World Cup or Olympic competition. And then relating to like the research, snowpack research that I did, there's like not really another option for Soldier Hollow, unfortunately, because there's the FIS, which is the International Ski Federation. There's an altitude limit, so you can't, at least as of now, you can't compete above, I think it's 2,000 meters, so around like 6,000 feet above sea level. Yeah. So Soldier Hollow is already one of the highest Olympic venues in the world, because it's at about, I think, 5,800. I could be wrong on that. But so unfortunately, the venues that are the most impacted by warmer temperatures and less snow are also not able to move up in elevation anymore, because there's not the same rules for a non-aerobic activity like downhill, but for an aerobic activity, there's, some scientists decided that that was the good limit.
I know budget-wise, the upfront cost in 2002 was a lot bigger, obviously, than it is currently, because we have so many venues. So I'm not really sure exactly the budget to support these venues or every other detail that goes into the Olympics, but I would imagine there's more wiggle room because we're not building this stuff. I think the budget right now is like a quarter of what it was for 2002, so we have more room to play with improving venues and creating that possibility for making snow and stuff like that. So
that's great.
Yeah,
I think we have one final question.
Yeah, I might probably have the last question, but maybe you could quickly discuss about the maintenance that's required on man-made versus natural snow, and also, here's a discussion in itself. How would you feel? What's your feelings on a proposed gondola as far as the impact of the environment in Utah? That could be a discussion right in itself, but those are two
a whole extra hour for that last question.
Yeah, that's a big discussion, but maybe quickly you might be able to say something. I don't know.
Yeah, I can chime in on that. As far as the location of the gondola, like you mentioned, there's no Olympic events happening in Little Cottonwood Canyon, so the only impact we would have to look into is the increase in skier visits due to the Olympics. which I would assume would happen because people will come visit and want to ski. But as far as it being solely tied to the Olympics, there are no events happening up Little Cottonwood Canyon. There's still a lot of stuff up in the air when it comes to improving the transportation there. We definitely have to have some solution because cars on the road is probably the biggest contributor to the air quality currently. So we don't have a perfect solution yet, but it's definitely up there in priority for making a change. We don't know what that would be exactly, but yeah.
And I guess in terms of natural versus man-made snow, obviously there's a lot more water use to man-make snow. And then there's, at least at like high-level competitions, you can, like Martha was saying, you can inject chemicals into the snow. Cross-country venues, they'll salt the snow to kind of lower the freezing point. So it's pretty easy to maintain it for like a 2-day competition, but not for an entire season or an entire 3 to 4 week Olympic stretch, or like almost an 8-week stretch when you're counting the Paralympics in there too.
They have made snow guns now that you can make snow at higher temperatures. HKD, I think, is the company. There's
like
also
60 degrees or something.
Yeah, and there's also these like snow boxes I heard about at a conference where they can make snow in an environment and then they move it to where they need it for a certain number of days you need for the competition. So there's a lot of adapting going on, and while that's good and we can keep the Band-Aid there for a while, we need to focus on improving and reducing as well.
Long-term solutions.
Yep.
Well, I think that will be our last question for today. We have run out of time, but I want to thank you all for joining us today for this conversation, and I especially want to thank our panelists, Celia, Jared, and Martha. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your insights with us.